I did not expect my 4th of July to end on the ground behind my father's house in Falcon, Colorado, with the smell of burned metal rising from my skin and the people who were supposed to love me laughing as if nothing had happened. My name is Captain Mara Ellington, and after 12 years in Army aviation from flight school in Alabama to wildfire evacuation missions in Colorado, I thought I had already lived through every kind of heat the world could throw at me. I was wrong. That morning started quietly at Fort Carson. I had just wrapped up a long week of fire evacuation training flights in the Chinook, and my shoulders still ached from hours of gear and long runs up and down the flight line. I wanted nothing more than a shower and an evening alone, but my stepmother Linda called again and again, insisting I show up at the family barbecue. She said it was just family and neighbors and that people wanted to see me. It sounded harmless enough. I said yes, even when my stomach tightened the way it always did when she used that sweet voice that usually meant trouble. By 5 o'clock, I was pulling up to my dad's house. Cars lined the curb, and the sound of old country music drifted through the yard. Kids ran around with sparklers. The smell of grilled ribs hung in the warm air. For a moment, I thought maybe this year things would be different. That hope lasted less than 5 minutes. Brittany, my stepsister, spotted me first. She looked me up and down with that practiced smirk she had worn since high school. "Nice uniform," she said while sipping a drink. I was off duty and in simple jeans, but she always used the word uniform like an insult. I gave her a polite nod, the kind drilled into you at basic, and walked past. My father, Raymond, gave me a half hug, distracted, and hurried as if he had somewhere more important to be. Linda was beside the grill with a glass of wine in one hand, flipping chicken with the other. She greeted me loudly so that everyone could hear. "Look who finally decided to show up, our brave pilot." A few neighbors chuckled. Brittany leaned in close and whispered so only I could hear. "Real pilots do not hide behind their clothes." There it was, the familiar sting. Military bearing teaches you to hold steady no matter what, but sometimes the fight is on the inside. I kept my voice calm. "Brittany, I just came to eat and say hello. I do not want any trouble today." She smiled a slow, deliberate smile and said, "Trouble usually happens when you show up." Linda laughed from the grill as if it were the funniest thing she had heard all week. I tried to walk away, but Brittany followed, matching each step. She knew exactly how to get under my skin, and she wanted an audience. She always wanted an audience. The crowd shifted around the tables, and I suddenly found myself standing beside the big propane grill. The stainless steel panel glowed from the heat. Linda topped off her wine and watched with an expression that made my hands go cold. Brittany stepped closer and said loud enough for several people to hear, "Maybe the Army toughened you up, or maybe they figured out you get scared of real heat." I opened my mouth to tell her to stop, but she moved faster than I expected. She gave me a hard shove. Not playful, not accidental. A shove meant to humiliate me in front of everyone. My right arm hit the metal panel of the grill before I could catch myself. The heat punched through my skin like fire. I gasped and collapsed to my knees, the pain sharp and bright. For a split second, the entire yard went silent, and then someone laughed. It was Linda. She raised her wine glass and said, "Maybe that is the only heat she can handle, Miss Army Helicopter." The laughter spread around the tables. Not everyone joined in, but enough did. Enough to make my chest tighten, not just from pain, but from something heavier. Something that felt like betrayal shaped over decades. I tried to inhale, but my lungs refused to open, and the world blurred around the edges. Brittany backed away with her hands up, pretending innocence, while Linda shook her head as if I was overreacting. "She is a soldier. She is fine. She is used to pain. If not for one neighbor, Mrs. Howard, who was in her 60s and saw the whole thing, I do not know what would have happened next." She rushed toward me, ignoring Linda's sharp glare, and pulled her phone from her pocket. "I am calling emergency services," she said firmly. When the paramedics arrived, Linda tried to wave them off, saying I was tough, and it was nothing but the lead medic took one look at my arm and his expression changed. The burn pattern was too clean, too linear, too wrong to be brushed aside. He asked what happened, and Linda quickly answered. She slipped. But the medic looked at me, waiting for my answer. I whispered, "I cannot breathe," and that was all he needed. They loaded me into the ambulance fast, and my last clear thought before the doors closed was simple and sharp. They laughed. They all laughed. If your family has ever laughed while you were hurting, tell me where you are watching from." The ride to Evans Army Community Hospital blurred into fragments of bright lights and quick voices and the steady thump of my own pulse pounding in my ears. I tried to hold on to the edges of consciousness the way we are trained to stay present during medevac drills, but my breathing kept breaking into shallow gasps, and the pain in my arm spread in a slow, heavy wave. The paramedic sitting beside me kept repeating, "You are doing fine." "Captain, stay with me," but even his steady voice felt distant. When the ambulance doors opened outside the ER, the warm air of the July evening rushed in. I heard two nurses speaking before I even saw them. "Burn to the forearm. Unknown mechanism, bring her in." Their footsteps moved fast, crisp, and purposeful, and then I was rolled into the bright, cold light of the triage room. The familiar smell of antiseptic and metal hit me. I had been in this hospital many times for flight physicals and routine checks, but never like this. A woman stepped into view pulling on gloves. Sharp eyes, calm expression, clipped movements. Dr. Caroline Meeks. She had the presence of someone who had seen everything from training accidents to altitude sickness to the occasional wildfire responder brought in half-conscious. She looked at me, then at the medic's preliminary notes, then back at me. "Captain Ellington, what happened?" Her tone was steady, not accusing, not warm, simply professional. I opened my mouth, but the truth stuck behind my teeth. I slipped, I whispered, and the words felt brittle, the way lies always do. She nodded slowly, as if filing that answer away, but not trusting it. "All right, let us get you settled," she said. The nurses cut away the sleeve of my shirt, and I felt the sudden exposure of cool air on my shoulder. When they eased the fabric from my burned arm, I clenched my jaw. Army discipline teaches you to control pain, to breathe through it, but some kinds of pain still find the cracks. Dr. Meeks leaned in. The bright white overhead light revealed the injury clearly. Her expression changed almost imperceptibly, but I caught it. A pause. A breath held. A quick glance at the nurse beside her. "This is not from a fall," she murmured. The nurse nodded. The burn was clean in shape, almost geometric, a narrow band across my skin with sharply defined borders. A linear thermal compression burn, the kind that comes from direct contact with a hot, solid surface under pressure. The kind you cannot get from slipping or brushing past something in a hurry. The room felt too bright, too exposed. I tried to sit up, but my head swam. "Captain, I need you to answer carefully," Dr. Meeks said. "Did someone hold you against something hot?" The question sliced straight through the fog in my mind. I shook my head quickly. "No. Did someone push you toward a heat source?" My heart kicked hard. Images flashed Brittany's smirk, the shove, Linda's laughter, the way the metal panel glowed. I wanted to tell the truth. I wanted to stay silent. Both instincts collided and left me frozen. I said nothing. Dr. Meeks exchanged a look with the nurse. It was the look medical staff give when something does not match the story. The quiet room grew even quieter. She spoke more gently this time. "Captain, injuries like this do not occur by accident. You are safe here, all right. No one can hurt you in this room." I stared straight ahead at the IV pole, at the ceiling tiles, at anything but her eyes. Years of being told to be tough, years of minimizing my own pain, years of family telling me I was dramatic. It all locked my voice away. I whispered again. I slipped. Dr. Meeks exhaled slowly, not in frustration, but in understanding, the kind of understanding that comes from experience. She placed a hand near my uninjured shoulder, not touching, just grounding. "Captain, as a military physician, I have reporting obligations. When an injury looks inconsistent with the explanation, I cannot ignore it." I felt my breath catch. "Reporting what?" She straightened and removed her gloves. "I need to notify CID," she said calmly. "Criminal Investigation Division. This is standard procedure for suspected non-accidental injury." My chest tightened. CID, the word carried weight. They handled everything from theft on base to serious internal cases. Hearing their name connected the dots in an instant. My injury was not just an injury, it was evidence. The nurse began typing quickly notes, photos, angles, measurements. Their efficiency made everything feel even more real. I tried to sit up again, but Dr. Meeks gently told me to stay still. She ordered fluids pain management and a burn dressing. While the nurse worked, Dr. Meeks stepped out to make the call. I stared at the curtain swaying slightly from the air conditioning. CID, my family, Brittany's shove. Linda's glass of wine raised in amusement. The moments replayed in my mind with new clarity and new heaviness. The thought that someone else would now see what happened made me feel exposed, but at the same time, a small, unfamiliar sensation tugged beneath the fear. Relief. Someone believed me, even though I had not said a word. When Dr. Meeks returned, she spoke softly. "An agent will be here soon. You do not have to be afraid of telling the truth, Captain." I closed my eyes. For the first time in a very long time, someone was giving me permission, the kind my family never had. Have you ever tried to stay strong, even when everyone blamed you? The knock on the curtain came about 30 minutes after Dr. Meeks made the call. I heard the soft swish of fabric, and then a man stepped inside with the kind of posture that said he did not waste time on pleasantries. He wore plain clothes, but carried the unmistakable authority of someone who had spent years reading people before they spoke. Special Agent Marcus Hale, Criminal Investigation Division age, maybe late 30s, early 40s. Sharp eyes, measured voice. He introduced himself with a simple "Captain Ellington, I need to ask you a few questions." His tone held no judgment, only focus. I nodded, though my chest tightened. He pulled a small notebook from his pocket, glanced at the dressing on my arm, then asked the nurse for a moment alone. When the curtain closed behind her, he moved closer to the bed and studied the injury the way a pilot studies a pre-flight checklist, taking in details others would miss. "Linear compression," he said quietly. "Clear edges. No slippage marks. No angled brush." My stomach dropped because he had just described what the ER staff had noticed. He looked directly into my eyes. "This is not consistent with falling onto a surface." My throat tightened. I whispered, "I told the doctor I slipped." He didn't flinch. "Captain, I am going to be direct because that is my job. Injuries tell a story, and this one does not match yours." Something in my composure cracked. Years of collected discipline could not hold the pressure of that single sentence. I looked away, trying to steady myself by staring at the heart monitor instead. He continued, "Did someone push you toward the heat source?" I shook my head quickly, almost too quickly. "No." "Did someone shove you?" My breathing hitched. The room suddenly felt too small, too bright, too loud. I wanted to stay calm, but the question dragged the memory forward. The heat, the shove, the laughter. Linda's voice echoing in my head. "I said I fell." Hale pulled the chair closer and sat leaning forward, his elbows on his knees, not crowding but grounding. "Captain people lie because they are afraid. Burns do not." I pressed my lips together, trying to keep control, but tears blurred my vision before I could stop them. I had not cried in years, not through training, not through deployments, not through lonely holidays. But this man's steady voice and the unshakable truth he spoke sliced through every wall I had built. The first tears slipped down my face, silent and hot. Hale waited without interrupting. He had the posture of someone who had seen this more times than he wished. "Take your time," he said. I wiped my cheek with the back of my good hand, embarrassed by the loss of composure, but unable to stop. He opened the notebook. "Captain, I need you to tell me what happened at the barbecue. Start anywhere." I inhaled shakily. It was the 4th of July. My stepmother Linda insisted I come. My dad was there. My stepsister Brittany. Some neighbors. At first it was fine. Then Brittany made comments about me again. About my job. About flying. About me showing up. I swallowed hard. He nodded. "Go on." "She followed me around. Said I was hiding behind my clothes. She was loud. People were listening." I felt small saying it out loud. Hale asked, "Did she approach you near the grill?" "Yes," I whispered. "She got close. Too close." My voice cracked. She pushed me. The moment the words left my mouth, my shoulders collapsed and the weight I had been holding for hours, weeks, years pressed down at once. Hale did not interrupt or look shocked. He simply wrote the words slowly, carefully, as though recording something sacred. When I tried to make light of it, minimizing the action, brushing it off, he lifted his eyes. "Captain," he said firmly, "what she did could have caused far worse. Your burn is not minor. This was not a playful shove or a slip. This was intentional." I shook my head, still trying to defend Brittany out of old habit. "Maybe she did not mean—" He cut me off gently but with authority. "Captain, you do not get this injury by accident. People do not fall into grills like that." The pressure required, the angle, the contact pattern, everything here points to a deliberate action. His certainty broke something loose inside me. I whispered, "What if my family gets angry that I talked? What if they come after me?" Hale closed his notebook. "That is why we have procedures. From this point forward, this is not your burden. It is ours. We will handle the investigation." He stood and stepped slightly closer in a way that felt protective, not intimidating. "I am filing this as suspected domestic abuse, which is the correct classification. You will be assigned a victim advocate. You will not have to navigate this alone." The words domestic abuse made my breath catch. It felt too big, too heavy, too real. He continued, "Your only responsibility now is to tell the truth. We will take care of the rest." Before he stepped out, he paused at the curtain. "One last thing, Captain. You have endured enough. Stop protecting the people who hurt you." Then he was gone, leaving the curtain swaying and the room strangely quiet. My entire body trembled, not from pain, but from the realization that everything was changing. My family would know. They would be furious. They would not forgive me for talking. The fear pressed against my ribs, sharp and familiar, but this time, something else rose beneath it. The faintest flicker of strength, the first sign of a future not controlled by them. I was terrified, but I was not alone anymore. I lay in that hospital bed with the burn dressing wrapped carefully around my arm and the steady beeping of the monitor filling the silence, and it struck me with startling clarity that this moment did not begin at the barbecue. It did not begin with the shove or the heat or the laughter. It began decades earlier, long before I knew what military discipline was or what resilience really meant. My earliest memory of being hurt was not pain. It was laughter. I was 8 years old, riding my small blue bicycle along the sidewalk in front of our house in Falcon. The summer sun beat down hard, and the wheels clattered over the uneven concrete. I remember the exact moment the front tire hit a rock. The handlebars twisted, and I went down fast, scraping my knee and palm against the pavement. The sting was immediate, sharp, and hot, but what stuck with me all these years was not the fall. It was the sound that followed. Linda stood on the porch, arms crossed, wine glass already in hand, though the clock had barely passed noon. She laughed. Not a startled laugh, not a worried laugh, a mocking, slow laugh that wrapped around me like a tightening rope. "Cry, baby," she said, shaking her head. I remember sitting there on the pavement with dirt on my hands and red trickling from my knee, not understanding why the person who was supposed to help me looked amused instead. I did not cry after that. Not then, not for many years. At 12, it happened again. Not a fall this time, but the kind of moment that teaches a child how blame works in a household where truth is inconvenient. Brittany broke Linda's favorite ceramic vase during an argument with a friend. I was in the next room doing homework when I heard the crash. When Linda stormed in, Brittany pointed straight at me without a second of hesitation and said, "Mara did it." I felt the injustice like a punch to the chest, but before I could open my mouth, Linda ordered me to stand outside in the yard. No jacket, no explanation, no chance to defend myself. The afternoon wind was cold, and I stood there for nearly an hour staring at the grass while Brittany watched from the window smirking. Something inside me settled that day, a silent resignation that defending myself only made things worse. At 18, the pattern was so familiar I could predict the reaction before I heard it. I had just received news that I earned a scholarship from ROTC at Colorado State University, a moment most parents would celebrate. I called my father, expecting at least a hint of pride. There was a pause on the phone, a long, heavy one, before he said flatly, "The military is not for girls, Mara. You should focus on something more realistic." Realistic. As if discipline, ambition, and purpose were somehow unreachable. As if my dreams were an inconvenience. I hung up the phone that day and made a silent promise that I would go anyway and never ask for his approval again. He never came to my commissioning ceremony. He said he was busy. I learned to swallow the disappointment quietly. At 20, I went through OSUT training, and it was the first time in my life I felt surrounded by people who valued effort and grit more than excuses and manipulation. I pushed my body to its limits. I endured exhaustion and long marches and endless drills, and it made me stronger in ways I had never felt before. But even there, the shadow of my family followed me. While other trainees had families cheering at graduation, mine had empty seats. I scanned the crowd, knowing no one would wave back at me. When we tossed our hats in the air, I smiled for the first time in weeks, but there was an ache behind the joy, a familiar emptiness dressed up as strength. I had learned by then that being alone meant being safe. All those years of swallowed words and quiet endurance became a kind of armor, but armor has cracks, and over time the cracks deepen. The memory of Linda laughing at my bike fall stayed with me. The memory of Brittany's false accusations stayed with me. The memory of my father dismissing my career stayed with me. And the memory of standing alone at my OSUT graduation stayed with me. These moments were not isolated. They were lessons repeated again and again. Do not complain. Do not fight back. Do not expect support. Endure silently. The military taught me to be strong, but my childhood taught me to be silent, and silence is a dangerous habit when people learn they can hurt you without consequence. Lying there in that ER room with the burn dressing tightening slightly as it cooled, I realized something that made my chest both ache and loosen. The barbecue was not just one bad night. It was the culmination of years of conditioning. Years of being told through laughter, punishment, and dismissal that my pain did not matter. Every time I tried to defend myself, someone twisted the truth until it felt like I was the problem. Every reaction I gave them was turned against me. No wonder I lied to the doctor. No wonder I tried to protect Brittany from accountability even after she shoved me. No wonder the words I slipped came out so automatically. Silence was survival in that house, and survival habits are hard to break. But Special Agent Hale's voice echoed in my mind. Burns do not lie. People do. Maybe for the first time someone had said out loud what I had felt for decades. The truth was not my enemy. The silence was. As I stared at the ceiling, the past settled into place like puzzle pieces forming a picture I had spent years refusing to see. I had spent a lifetime enduring hurt and pretending it was normal. And now, for the first time, the cycle was breaking whether I felt ready or not. By the next morning, the burn on my arm throbbed in a slow, deep rhythm that pulsed all the way to my shoulder. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the heaviness in my chest. I barely slept, drifting in and out as nurses checked vitals and adjusted the IV. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same scene replaying Brittany's shove, Linda's smirk, the glow of the metal panel, the laughter. And behind it all, the quiet voice of Special Agent Hale saying, "Burns do not lie. People do." I was finishing a cup of lukewarm water when the curtain opened and Mrs. Howard stepped in accompanied by a nurse. She held her purse clutched against her chest and her face was tight with worry. When she saw me, she walked straight over and placed her hand lightly near my wrist. "Oh, sweetheart," she murmured. "I'm so sorry." I thanked her, but the words felt thin, too small for what she had done. She reached into her purse with trembling fingers and pulled out her phone. I didn't know if I should bring this, but the agent said yes. She unlocked it and handed it to me. On the screen was a still image from the backyard, slightly shaky, but clear enough. Brittany's hand was on my shoulder, pushing forward, not sideways, not accidental. The frame showed the angle of her body, her stance braced, her face twisted in something that went beyond mockery. And behind her, exactly as I remembered, Linda stood near the grill with her arms crossed over her chest and a smile spreading across her face. I felt my breath catch. I knew what happened. I had lived it, but seeing it from the outside through a lens held by someone who had no reason to lie made the moment heavier, somehow more undeniable than ever. Mrs. Howard opened the next file. The video began with her accidentally filming the grass, then lifting the phone toward the group just as Brittany stepped in front of me. The audio picked up fragments of voices and laughter, and then Brittany's shove came into frame unmistakably deliberate. The moment my arm hit the grill, the video wobbled as Mrs. Howard gasped. She had filmed the aftermath too, the way I dropped onto the grass, clutching my chest, struggling for breath. "You didn't slip," she said, her voice thick with guilt. "You didn't fall." I nodded slowly, unable to speak. The truth was right there in her hands, and suddenly, the years of silence I had clung to felt foolish, almost dangerous. She squeezed my hand before stepping out to meet the CID agents waiting by the nurses' station. A few minutes later, Special Agent Hale returned holding a printed set of still images and the transcript of the medic's initial report. His face showed no surprise, just confirmation of what he already suspected. "This is consistent," he said. "This is exactly what we needed." He pulled up a chair again, but this time he had a folder open already filled with notes. The medics gave statements, he continued. "Their observations match the mechanism of injury and the timeline you described." He paused. "They also documented the stepmother attempting to prevent them from transporting you, which strengthens the suspicion of intentional harm." I felt my stomach dip. Linda had always cared more about appearances than truth, but hearing it laid out like this, stripped of emotion and told in simple factual language, made everything sharpen. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't exaggerating. Hale added, "We also reached out to local law enforcement for any relevant history. There were no formal reports, but multiple neighbors confirmed emotional tension over the years." He didn't say toxic family, but the implication hung heavily in the air. When he left to continue processing the evidence, I sank back against the pillows, exhausted and strangely hollow. The truth was coming out faster than I was prepared for. Around midday, another familiar face appeared at the curtain. Chief Warrant Officer 2 Jensen, one of the aviators in my company at Fort Carson, stepped inside, still in his flight uniform. His expression softened when he saw my arm. "Captain," he said quietly, "we heard you were here." I tried to sit up, but he shook his head. "Don't push yourself." I forced a small smile. "It's manageable." He studied my face for a long moment. "No, it isn't. Not just the injury. Something else is going on." I looked away. Years of Army culture had taught me never to show weakness in front of peers, but Jensen wasn't just a coworker. He had flown with me through emergency evacuations and late-night missions. He knew the difference between exhaustion and something deeper. After a short silence, he said, "I'm filing a concern with the company commander. You don't have to tell me everything, but you're not okay, and the command team needs to know." His voice held no pity, just loyalty, the quiet, grounded kind that does not announce itself. I should have felt embarrassed. Instead, I felt something close to relief. "Thank you," I whispered. When he left, I realized the circle of people who knew the truth was widening far beyond my family's control. Mrs. Howard had evidence. The medics had statements. CID had suspicions becoming certainties. My unit had concerns. Every layer of silence I had relied on for years was stripping away. And for the first time in my life, the truth wasn't suffocating me. It was protecting me. That realization settled over me slowly like a weight shifting off my shoulders. I had spent years believing I had to shield my family from consequences, but now I understood something I had never allowed myself to fully acknowledge. The people I had been protecting all this time had never protected me. The photos didn't lie, the video didn't lie, the injury didn't lie, and I couldn't lie for them anymore. By the second morning, the hospital room felt less like a place of recovery and more like a strange, suspended world where the truth finally had space to breathe. But outside, that curtain reality was moving quickly, and my family could feel it. The first call came at 7:30. My phone vibrated on the tray table beside me. The screen lit up with Linda's name, and for a moment, I just stared at it, unable to decide whether I felt fear, anger, or the old familiar obligation to answer. I finally pressed accept. Before I could say hello, her voice crashed through the speaker, sharp and frantic. "Mara, what are you doing?" Her tone was nothing like the smug laughter from the barbecue. This was fear, panic, damage control. I said nothing. She continued, "You need to tell that investigator that you slipped. Just say you were tired or distracted or something. This is getting out of hand." My throat tightened. "Mom?" She cut me off sharply. Do not call me that right now. Listen to me. If you tell CID that Brittany pushed you, that is going to follow her for years. She could lose her job. She could be charged. She could be blacklisted. I closed my eyes, leaning back against the pillows. My arm throbbed. My chest felt tight. Linda lowered her voice to that cold, controlled tone she used when she wanted everyone to fall in line. Do not destroy this family, Mara. Do not throw away everything we built because of some clumsy moment at a barbecue. My pulse picked up. My voice came out small and fragile. I didn't slip, Linda. There was a sharp exhale on the other end, as if she could not believe I dared to contradict her. Then she said the sentence she had used my entire childhood to force compliance. You owe us. After the call ended, I stared at the ceiling, letting her words sink deeper than I wanted them to. You owe us. She had said it when I got good grades, when I earned scholarships, when I joined the Army. Every accomplishment somehow became something they had granted me, not something I had earned. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text. Brittany. The message preview froze my breath. If you tell the truth, I'll say, you pushed me. I opened the text fully. She had typed a long, frantic paragraph trying to paint herself as the victim. She said she would tell CID I grabbed her arm. She said she would tell them I stumbled into the grill because I was drunk. She said she would show old messages and twist them to look like I had anger issues. And she ended with, the entire family will back me. They always had, even when I was 8, even when I was 12, even when I was 18. My fingers trembled. I set the phone down quickly as if the words could burn me worse than the metal panel had. A nurse entered to check my vitals and must have seen the shake in my hands. She asked softly, Do you need anything, Captain? Water, I whispered. When she stepped out, the curtain rustled again, and Special Agent Hale appeared holding a folder and wearing the same unreadable expression that somehow made me feel grounded. You look pale, he said, pulling the chair beside my bed. I forced a breath. They called. He nodded as if expecting that. What did they say? That it was an accident. That I should tell you it was an accident. That I should lie. My throat tightened and the rest of the words spilled out. They said I owe them. And Brittany texted. She is threatening to say I pushed her. Hale listened without interrupting. When I finally finished, he flipped open the folder and tapped a page inside with his pen. Captain, he said the more they talk, the more they incriminate themselves. I frowned, confused. He lifted the page, reading a note. Attempt to influence victim statement. Attempt to obstruct investigation. Threatening witness coordination. He set the folder down. Every message, every call asking you to lie strengthens the case, not theirs. My breath wavered. He continued. We already have physical evidence. We have video. We have stills. We have medic statements. We have neighbor testimony. Their behavior now is confirmation, not defense. I felt a strange mix of fear and relief wash over me. Fear because my family was spiraling. Relief because I no longer had to carry their chaos in my chest. Hale leaned forward again, his tone steady and firm. You are not responsible for managing their reactions. You are not responsible for their consequences. You are responsible only for your truth. I swallowed hard. He added, if they contact you again, let us know. Do not respond. Do not argue. Everything they send us tells the same story. The pressure in my chest loosened a fraction. For years, they had convinced me that speaking up would ruin everything. But now Hale was telling me the opposite. Their attempts to silence me were the very thing exposing them. After he left, I picked up my phone again and looked at the list of missed calls and unread messages from Linda and Brittany. The old reflex inside me whispered, respond, fix it, smooth it over, keep the peace, the way I always did. But peace built on silence was not peace. It was control, and I was done being controlled. I powered off my phone and placed it face down on the table. For the first time since the barbecue, the room felt quiet in a way that did not suffocate me. I was terrified of the days ahead, but Hale was right. I did not owe them my silence, not anymore. By the third morning, the swelling around the burn had eased slightly, but the heaviness in my chest felt even deeper. It was the weight of choices I had never made before. Choices I had spent my whole life avoiding. Every attempt from Linda and Brittany to force silence had pushed me closer to a truth I had never dared speak aloud. When Dr. Caroline Meeks stepped into my room that morning, I could tell immediately she was not here only to check the wound. She pulled a stool beside the bed and rested her clipboard on her lap in a way that told me she meant to talk, not rush through a checklist. "How are you feeling today, Captain?" Her voice was gentle but grounded. I tried to answer automatically. "I am fine," but the words snagged in my throat. She watched me carefully. "You do not need to be fine right now." She waited a moment, letting the silence settle. Then she said, "I want to recommend something. We have behavioral health and counseling services on base. I think speaking to someone could help you process what is happening." My first instinct was to refuse. Therapy was not something we talked about growing up, and even in the Army it carried the old unspoken weight of weakness, though everyone insisted it shouldn't. I looked away. "I do not know if that is necessary, ma'am." She tilted her head slightly. "Yesterday, when I asked what happened, you could barely breathe. That was not because of pain alone." My fingers tightened around the blanket. She continued, "You are not the first soldier I have seen who tried to carry a lifetime of hurt on their own, and every single one of them believed they could manage it until they could not." Her words struck deeper than the burn had. I stared at my hands, afraid that if I looked at her, I would lose whatever grip I had left. She lowered her voice. "Captain, did someone hurt you before this?" My eyes stung. Something inside me trembled as though a locked door was creaking open after decades. I swallowed hard and whispered, "They have hurt me for 20 years." It was the first time I had ever said it out loud, not to myself, not in my mind, not in hidden ways or half-truths. 20 years. 2 decades of minimizing, scolding myself for being sensitive, trying to earn affection that never came, pretending everything was normal. Dr. Meeks did not flinch or offer empty sympathy. She simply nodded once with quiet understanding. "Thank you for saying that." She wrote a short note on her clipboard and said, "I am placing an immediate referral for counseling, and I am also requesting that the DoD Victim Advocacy Program contact you this afternoon." I blinked. I had heard of the program, but only distantly. It was something for military spouses or soldiers dealing with domestic situations that posed risk or ongoing harm. I had never imagined my name would be connected to it. When she stepped out, I sat there absorbing the weight of what had just happened. The truth was no longer something I tucked away like a photo I didn't want anyone to see. It was out in the open, spoken and heard. A few hours later, a soft knock sounded at the curtain. A woman in civilian clothes stepped in, wearing a badge around her neck, identifying her as a DoD victim advocate. Her name was Melissa Carter, about mid-40s, with warm eyes and calm energy. "Hello, Captain Ellington. Dr. Meeks reached out to us. I am here to provide support and to help you navigate the next steps." Her presence felt strangely grounding. She asked if she could sit, and I nodded. She opened a thick binder filled with resources and forms, but did not push them on me. She simply explained, "This program exists to make sure you are safe emotionally and physically during and after the investigation. It also ensures you are not pressured to remain silent." The word silent stung. She asked if I felt comfortable telling her what happened. I hesitated, then slowly explained the barbecue, the push, the laughter the years before it, and the messages demanding I lie. She listened without interruption, taking occasional notes, but mostly watching my expressions as if gauging how much I had carried alone. When I finished, she placed a simple form on the tray table. "This is your victim statement. You do not have to sign it today, but when you are ready, this will serve as your official documentation of the harm done to you." She paused, then added, "Special Agent Hale will use this alongside the evidence. It is your voice in writing." My throat tightened. My voice in writing. My story. Not twisted by Linda, not rewritten by Brittany, not silenced by guilt or pressure. Mine. I stared at the form for a long moment. The lines waiting for my words felt heavier than any deployment gear I had ever strapped on. After a deep, trembling breath, I picked up the pen. My hand shook as I wrote my name at the top. Each sentence that followed felt like a piece of armor sliding off and another piece of strength replacing it. I wrote what happened at the barbecue. I wrote how long the pattern had existed. I wrote about silence shaped into survival, and survival turned into fear. When I reached the signature line, my chest tightened again, but this time it was not fear. It was release. I signed it. The pen left a small indentation on the paper from the pressure of my grip. I exhaled slowly, letting the air escape in a long, controlled breath. For the first time in my life, I did not protect them. And for the first time in my life, someone was finally protecting me. The day they asked me to come to the Falcon HOA Community Hall, I felt a mixture of anxiety and a strange sense of anticipation. After signing my statement with the Victim Advocacy Program, I had never imagined I would stand in front of not just CID and the investigators, but an audience that included my neighbors, my community, and the people who had witnessed my humiliation years ago without lifting a hand. The hall smelled faintly of polished wood and old carpeting typical of the small town centers in Falcon, Colorado. Folding chairs were set in rows facing a small stage with a projector and screen, and the murmur of voices carried a tense undertone. Agent Marcus Hale, precise and composed as always, greeted me at the entrance. "Captain Ellington," he said, "this is the setup. We are reconstructing the scene for public exposure. Your safety and privacy are our priority." I nodded my hands, gripping the strap of my bag, still in civilian clothes, but carrying the weight of my uniformed composure internally. A few familiar neighbors were there, some who had witnessed the barbecue that infamous 4th of July, some who had heard only whispers. Among them, Mrs. Howard gave me a gentle nod of encouragement, the only person from the original day who had quietly tried to help. Hale directed me to a marked position near the back of the hall where I would stand. The screen flickered to life behind him, and the first few seconds of video played. The grainy footage captured the setting almost innocently, the backyard of my family's home, with the grill-smoking kids running around and adults chatting casually. But then, Brittany appeared, stepping closer to me with a smirk, her hand making contact with my shoulder, shoving me just enough to tip my arm against the metal surface of the grill. Gasps went through the room as people began to see exactly what had happened. Linda, standing near the grill in the video, laughed as I flinched and dropped to the grass, my arm brushing the edge of the burner. In real time, her laughter had sounded casual, harmless even. On the screen, it was chilling. Brittany's expression shifted into mock horror, a reaction too calculated to be real. I could feel my stomach twist as I realized this was the first time the community would see the reality rather than the carefully constructed narrative my family had spun for years. Linda's face went pale and she stepped back, hands slightly raised as if she could somehow erase the images. Brittany's mouth opened in protest, her voice caught somewhere between panic and the fake sobbing she had practiced in front of friends for years. I could hear her whisper through the video I didn't mean it, but the tone betrayed everything. People in the audience started to murmur, some leaning forward, some exchanging looks of disbelief. You could almost feel the collective judgment settling like a weight in the room. Agent Hale paused the video and a silence fell. He looked at Linda and Brittany and said simply, "The burn patterns and the physical contact here are undeniable. This was not an accident." The room seemed to exhale as if everyone collectively recognized the truth they had ignored or rationalized for so long. I stood heart-pounding as Hale continued. "We are showing this not to humiliate, but to document the reality. The victim's experience cannot be rewritten." I felt a strange rush, a sense of vindication mixing with exhaustion. My neighbors, many of whom had attended my family's gatherings, began to react openly. A few shook their heads, muttering under their breath about the audacity of someone laughing while a soldier was hurt. Others whispered about how long this had been going on, about the years of silent suffering. I could hear the murmurs, but I kept my focus steady on the screen, letting the images speak the truth I had been unable to articulate fully in words. Brittany's fake sobs escalated as she saw herself from another perspective, and Linda's attempt to maintain composure faltered completely. The public exposure was swift and thorough. A few people applauded quietly as if to honor my courage, while others voiced disapproval at my family's actions. The shift in energy in the room was palpable. I felt a mixture of satisfaction and shock. It was one thing for CID to know the truth, another for the community to witness it firsthand. For the first time, the laughter that had haunted me was met with outrage rather than acceptance. Brittany's eyes darted around the room, realizing that her web of deceit had unraveled in the most public way possible. Linda tried to intervene, opening her mouth to defend her daughter, but the words seemed empty against the evidence projected for everyone to see. Some neighbors shook their heads in disbelief. Some leaned over to comfort me quietly, acknowledging that what I had endured was real and that for once I was not alone. I could feel my chest tighten not from fear, but from the release of a burden I had carried silently for 2 decades. The public exposure, though tense and emotionally raw, was a pivotal moment. It marked the shift from being a passive victim to someone whose truth could not be denied. As the video ended, Hale approached and quietly said to me, "Captain, the community now knows the truth. You were never at fault." I nodded, my throat-tight eyes stinging from a mix of tears and relief. For the first time, the balance of judgment had shifted. The hum of conversations filled the room as people discussed the footage, the incident, and the courage it took to bring this to light. Brittany slumped in her chair, her earlier confidence replaced by a dawning realization that her actions were no longer shielded by lies or selective memory. Linda's attempt to maintain her facade collapsed completely. I finally felt a sense of empowerment that had eluded me for years. The exposure was not just about shame for them. It was about reclaiming my own narrative, showing the community, the neighbors, and even my own family that the truth could not be ignored. And in that moment, standing there in Falcon Community Hall, I understood the profound effect of letting the world witness the reality of long-hidden abuse. It was my voice, my story, and for the first time it resonated beyond the walls of my own household. A subtle CTA formed naturally as I glanced around, a thought I knew would resonate with viewers. If someone ever laughed while you were hurting, do not let the silence bury your truth. Speak out, let others see, and let justice begin. After the public exposure at Falcon Community Hall, the momentum shifted. The evidence was undeniable, and the burden of proof lay clearly against my stepsister Brittany and stepmother Linda. The following week, I received a call from Special Agent Marcus Hale asking me to come in for an update. My hands shook slightly as I drove through the familiar streets of Colorado Springs, the sun casting long shadows over the base housing. I had spent weeks feeling tense, trapped in the dissonance between my military discipline and the chaos of my family's behavior, but the thought that finally the law might intervene gave me a strange sense of relief mixed with lingering anxiety. At the CID office, Hale greeted me with his usual composed demeanor. "Captain," he said, "we have submitted all the evidence to the El Paso County Sheriff's Office. They will proceed with formal charges." I nodded, trying to steady my breathing. The gravity of the situation settled in. This was no longer just a personal family matter. It had escalated to a legal level where accountability could no longer be avoided. My stepsister Brittany was officially under investigation for assault resulting in bodily injury. Every time I heard the words, a mixture of vindication and disbelief coursed through me. For years, she had smiled in my face while undermining my achievements, and now the law recognized the physical consequences of her actions. The documentation from the ER, the CID interviews, and the photos provided a clear picture of the incident. The burn pattern was examined in detail by the medical examiner, and it aligned perfectly with the testimony and footage we had collected. This evidence would make it nearly impossible for Brittany to claim it had been accidental or that I had somehow provoked her in a way that justified her shove. Linda, my stepmother, faced investigations for negligence and witness tampering. Her laughter and dismissive attitude at the original incident, combined with her efforts to downplay the severity of the injury and manipulate statements afterward, meant she could not escape scrutiny. For decades, she had positioned herself as the matriarch, the person in control, but now even her influence was countered by documented proof and legal procedures. My father, Raymond, did not appear in any of the proceedings. He avoided calls and inquiries, leaving me to navigate this storm largely on my own. His absence was a mix of relief and frustration. I did not need his interference, but his silence reinforced the decades of abandonment I had felt emotionally. As I left the CID office, the weight of the investigation was heavy, but I was accompanied by a victim advocate assigned to me through the military support program. They walked with me, spoke to me quietly, reminding me that my role now was to be safe, to cooperate with the law, and to preserve my testimony. The presence of the advocate was reassuring, a buffer between the trauma I had endured and the system that now sought justice. Driving back home, I reflected on the journey from the BBQ incident to this point. Every detail mattered: the shove, the burn, the laughter, the negligence, the years of small humiliations that had culminated in a moment of undeniable evidence. It was sobering to realize how long it had taken for anyone to truly acknowledge the abuse I had faced within my own family. That night, I could barely sleep. I went through the burn images in my mind, the video footage, the faces of Brittany and Linda during the public exposure. There was anger, yes, but also a strange sense of liberation. For once, the truth was visible to others, and the law had recognized it. Over the next few days, I received updates from CID. Brittany was formally charged, and the case file included counts of assault, while Linda's investigation was ongoing, focusing on her role in attempting to mislead witnesses and obstruct the inquiry. The paperwork was precise, official, and intimidating in its detail. I reviewed each section, the legal terminology foreign yet empowering. The sheriff's office assured me that my testimony would be central, but that I would have protections in place. For the first time, I felt some semblance of safety. My role as a captain in the Army had taught me discipline and composure under stress, but this was a different type of stress, one rooted in betrayal and family dynamics. Yet the principles remained: clarity, precision, and truth. That clarity was now mirrored in the legal process. I began to see a faint light at the end of the tunnel. Justice was moving forward slowly but steadily. I could imagine Brittany and Linda confronted with the consequences of their actions beyond the shame of public exposure. The law was impartial, and for the first time I felt the protective force of the system. I spent time coordinating with the victim advocate about court procedures, my testimony, and strategies for emotional preparedness. The advocate reminded me that it was natural to feel anxious or afraid, but that every detail I provided strengthened the case. Over the next few weeks, the stress of waiting for hearings was mitigated by the small victories of acknowledgement. The acknowledgement that the burns were real, that the shove was intentional, and that my family's attempts to obscure the truth could not prevail. Each update from CID reinforced the sense that my voice, my suffering, and my truth mattered. I reflected on how this legal intervention was different from anything I had experienced in my family or even in the military hierarchy. Here, my personal experience was validated by evidence and by process, not by rank or performance. It was a profound lesson in accountability and empowerment. In those moments, I allowed myself to feel a mixture of relief, pride, and cautious optimism. The law had finally spoken, and it was saying that abuse, regardless of who inflicts it, is unacceptable. The process ahead would be long, but for the first time in decades, I had the support and framework to see justice through. The combination of CID investigation, public exposure, and formal charges created a path toward resolution that had previously seemed impossible. For the first time, the shadows of family control and manipulation felt less suffocating. I knew the journey was far from over, but the law had recognized the truth, and that recognition was a victory in itself. My hand lingered over my phone, contemplating sending a brief note of gratitude to Mrs. Howard, the neighbor who had called 911 and provided the video evidence. I knew that acknowledgement of small acts of courage contributed to the larger arc of justice. As I prepared to leave the base that evening, I felt a shift within myself, a combination of empowerment, cautious relief, and readiness for the next steps. The law had spoken, the charges were filed, and for the first time the balance of power felt less skewed. I allowed myself a moment of quiet reflection, knowing that my voice and my story would continue to have impact beyond this case. This was no longer just about me. It was a statement that abuse, negligence, and family betrayal have consequences, and that justice can prevail when courage and truth converge. The morning sun glinted off the metal gates of Fort Carson as I approached for my routine flight, briefing my mind still entangled in the legal proceedings that had unfolded over the past months. I could feel the tension in the air, a lingering residue from the CID investigation, the public exposure, and the realization that my family's lies were unraveling in front of the community. As I stepped toward the entrance, I noticed a familiar figure standing just beyond the guard post. It was my stepmother, Linda, her face streaked with tears, hands wringing nervously. Her posture was pleading, almost desperate, a stark contrast to the indifference and laughter I had grown up with. "Mara," she called, her voice trembling, "please don't destroy Brittany's life. She could lose her job. Don't do this." I stopped mid-step, the weight of her words pressing on me, but I refused to let myself be swayed. I had endured decades of manipulation, humiliation, and abuse. For years, I had protected them, minimized their actions, excused their behavior in the name of family. But those days were over. My military discipline had taught me to evaluate situations logically, to measure threats and consequences, and to stand firm when necessary. I took a deep breath, steadying myself against the emotional surge that Linda's presence ignited. I stepped closer, maintaining a controlled demeanor, my eyes meeting hers with unwavering resolve. "Linda," I said firmly, "I don't owe you my silence anymore." Her face paled, a mixture of shock and fear crossing her features. The audacity of her approach, the expectation that I would forgive and protect them despite everything, was staggering. Moments later, my phone buzzed. It was a voice message from Brittany. I hesitated briefly, fingers hovering over the screen before pressing play. Her voice came through hesitant and tinged with desperation. "Mara, I know I've crossed a line. I'm sorry. We're family. You owe me this." The words hit me with a cold clarity. For years, she had used family as a weapon, leveraging guilt and obligation to manipulate me. Now she tried again, cloaked in remorse and fear, hoping I would capitulate and erase the consequences of her actions. I pressed stop, silence settling over me like a protective shield. I had faced the unthinkable before: Burns' humiliation at a public BBQ betrayal by those I should have trusted, and I had survived. I had stood up, reported the abuse, and seen the law recognize the truth. I would not allow their return to intimidate or manipulate me into inaction. I kept my military composure, the same discipline that had carried me through countless high-stakes missions and emergency situations. I knew the power of restraint and measured action. I did not respond to Linda, and I did not call Brittany back. Instead, I turned toward the base housing, feeling a strange mix of relief and resolve. By refusing to engage, I reclaimed control over the narrative of my life. The audacity of their approach, expecting mercy and compliance, underscored the lengths to which they would go to avoid accountability. I had spent years internalizing the lessons of control and submission taught by their laughter and dismissiveness. But now I rewrote the rules. I was no longer the silent observer of my own suffering. As I walked through the base, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The shove at the BBQ, the burns, the emergency response. CID's investigation, public exposure, legal filings, and finally the confrontation of truth. Each step had strengthened my resolve, shaping a version of myself that would not be coerced or silenced. I met my unit colleagues during the briefing, who noticed the subtle shift in my demeanor. CW2 Jensen gave me a knowing glance, a silent acknowledgement of the battles I had fought both within and outside the military structure. The support from my peers and the advocacy programs through the DoD reinforced that my choice to maintain boundaries was validated and respected. Later that day, I drafted a brief report to CID summarizing the audacity of the attempts at interference and reinforcing my intent to let the legal process proceed without yielding to emotional manipulation. Every word was deliberate, factual, and unwavering, leaving no room for misinterpretation. By documenting this encounter, I ensured that both Linda and Brittany's attempts to influence me would be on record, further securing the integrity of the ongoing investigation. That evening, as I stood on the balcony of my quarters overlooking the Colorado Springs landscape, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. The mountains in the distance, the fading light over the plains, and the quiet hum of base activity provided a backdrop for contemplation. I realized that reclaiming my autonomy was not just about resisting their demands. It was about establishing a precedent for how I would engage with the world moving forward. No longer would fear, guilt, or obligation dictate my responses. I was empowered by the truth, by the law, and by my own courage. As night fell, I felt a sense of closure in the immediate confrontation, but also anticipation for the continued legal proceedings. I knew Brittany and Linda might attempt further manipulation, but their audacity could not override the evidence, the witnesses, or my resolve. I had the backing of the system, the military protocols, and my own inner strength. The echoes of the past decades of laughter at my pained dismissals of my achievements and attempts to control me were fading in the wake of this new chapter. I felt the power of my own voice, my actions, and my decisions shaping the outcome. I knew that by standing firm, I was not only protecting myself, but also sending a message that abuse and manipulation carry consequences. For the first time in my life, I felt the balance of power had shifted entirely in my favor. My silence had ended, my agency was intact, and the audacity of their demands had been met with unwavering resolve. I was ready to face the next stages of justice, fully equipped with the knowledge that I would no longer be a passive participant in their narrative. The confrontation at the gates of Fort Carson became a defining moment, a testament to resilience, discipline, and the refusal to be intimidated by those who once wielded fear and control as weapons. In that moment, I understood that my journey toward justice was not just a legal process, but an affirmation of my worth, strength, and unyielding commitment to truth. January 15th, 2025 dawned cold and crisp over Colorado Springs, the kind of day that sharpens every sound and freezes every movement. I arrived at the El Paso County Courthouse early, my uniform crisp, polished, and a symbol of the discipline that had carried me through this ordeal. The courthouse steps were bustling with local news crews, neighbors, and curious onlookers, many aware of the story that had unfolded over the past months. The air was heavy with anticipation, the sense that today would be a turning point for both me and my family. As I entered the courtroom, I felt a tension that was almost tangible. Brittany and Linda were seated at the defense table, their faces a mixture of nervousness and forced composure. Brittany's eyes darted around as if searching for an escape route, while Linda attempted to maintain a veneer of calm, though the tight lines around her mouth betrayed the anxiety beneath. The judge entered, and a hush fell over the room. The proceedings began with formalities, lawyers making their opening statements, emphasizing the need for clarity and truth in a case that had captured the attention of both the military community and the local neighborhood. The prosecuting attorney presented the evidence, the video footage from the Falcon HOA BBQ photographs of the burn pattern on my forearm and elbow, and the testimony from paramedics and Dr. Caroline Meeks. Each piece of evidence reinforced the reality of what had happened, the intentional shove, and the burn that could not be explained by a mere accident. Brittany's defense attorney attempted to cast doubt, insisting that the incident was accidental, that I had somehow misstepped or fallen. She tripped, they claimed, their voice steady but unconvincing against the visual proof displayed on the courtroom screens. I felt a pang of disbelief that after everything, the simplest, most evasive excuse was still being attempted. I adjusted my posture, a reflexive military habit, and reminded myself to remain calm, composed, and unwavering. The judge, a woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes and a commanding presence, leaned forward slightly, peering over her glasses. "Burn injuries do not come from tripping," she stated firmly, her voice carrying authority and clarity. The words reverberated through the courtroom, a statement of undeniable truth that cut through the layers of deceit and manipulation. I watched Brittany's face falter, the first genuine crack in her performance. Her fingers twisted nervously, her usual bravado replaced with anxiety. Linda's hand went to her mouth, a futile attempt to hide the growing panic that I had not seen from her in years. The prosecutor invited me to take the stand. I walked forward, every step measured, aware of the eyes following me, both sympathetic and critical. As I sat, I felt the weight of months of preparation, therapy sessions, and the support from the CID, the military advocacy programs, and my colleagues at Fort Carson. I recounted the events of the BBQ, describing Brittany's shove, the laughter of my stepmother, and the immediate pain I had felt from the thermal burn. I spoke clearly, emphasizing the linear burn pattern that indicated intentional contact with the hot surface. I explained my decision to seek medical help immediately and how Dr. Meeks had recognized the non-accidental nature of the injury. The courtroom remained silent, the gravity of the testimony hanging in the air. I could feel the attention of everyone, neighbors, reporters, and court officials alike, absorbing each word. The cross-examination was tense. Brittany's attorney pressed with rehearsed questions, attempting to plant doubt, but the evidence was insurmountable. I remained steadfast, recalling details accurately, maintaining my composure, and allowing the facts to speak for themselves. The burn pattern photographs were displayed, and even Brittany flinched, a small involuntary reaction that confirmed the reality of the pain she had caused. Dr. Meeks also testified, describing the nature of the burn and explaining why the pattern was inconsistent with a simple fall. Her words were precise, professional, and irrefutable. The judge nodded as she reviewed the evidence, occasionally jotting down notes, her expression stern and unyielding. The prosecution summarized the case, emphasizing the intentionality of the act, the previous history of dismissive and abusive behavior from my stepmother and stepsister, and the need for accountability. When it came time for the defense to speak, their arguments were thin, relying heavily on emotion and appeals to familial bonds. Brittany attempted a brief statement, her voice shaky. "I didn't mean it." She tripped. The courtroom collectively held its breath as the judge responded. The evidence presented shows deliberate action resulting in injury. Claims of tripping are inconsistent with the physical and testimonial proof. This court recognizes the severity of domestic abuse and the importance of responsibility and restitution. There was a quiet murmur from the audience. The verdicts were read. Brittany was sentenced to community service mandated anger management courses and ordered to provide restitution for medical expenses. Linda received a fine and mandatory counseling to address her negligence and enabling behavior. The ruling was measured just and reflective of the evidence and the law. The relief that washed over me was profound. Not only had the law recognized the abuse I endured, but it had also acknowledged the manipulation, the laughter at my pain, and the failure of my family to provide safety and support. As I left the courtroom, I felt a sense of closure. The weight of fear, humiliation, and betrayal that had lingered for so long began to lift. The public exposure, the CID investigation, and now the court's decision, all converged to validate my experience and reclaim my agency. I walked out into the sunlight, feeling a renewed sense of strength, clarity, and purpose. The steps that had once felt heavy under the burden of my family's actions were now firm and steady. I had faced my past, confronted the perpetrators, and seen justice served. For the first time, I could truly breathe, knowing that the truth had been recognized and that my resilience had triumphed over years of manipulation and abuse. This courtroom hearing was not just a legal victory. It was a pivotal moment in reclaiming my life, asserting my worth, and standing unflinchingly for what was right. I felt the support of those who had believed in me, the CID agents, medical professionals, military colleagues, and neighbors who had witnessed the journey. It was a reminder that courage, honesty, and steadfastness can overcome deceit and cruelty. The echoes of the past, the shove, the laughter, the attempts to silence me were finally replaced with a tangible affirmation of justice, leaving a lasting impact on my life and those who might face similar circumstances. I walked away from the courthouse not just as Captain Mara Ellington, U.S. Army Aviation Officer, but as a survivor, a witness to truth, and a person who had reclaimed her voice and her power. The days after the court hearing were surreal. I had finally faced Brittany and Linda in a legal setting, had seen the law affirm the truth of my experience, and yet the aftermath felt like stepping into an entirely new reality. For years, my life had been dictated by the fear of family retaliation, the whispered threats, the dismissive laughter whenever I was hurt or humiliated. Now that dynamic had been shattered. The first and most significant step I took was to sever all ties completely. I blocked numbers, changed email addresses, and ensured that no social media account left me vulnerable to contact. Every attempt at reaching me, whether from Brittany or Linda, was met with a void. They had underestimated my resolve. They had assumed that familial bonds would coerce me into silence or compliance, but I had spent decades learning how to rely on no one but myself. The act of cutting contact felt both liberating and terrifying. For the first time in 20 years, I was the one in control. Without the constant undercurrent of fear and manipulation, I began to rebuild a life that had been fractured by abuse and neglect. The military community, my colleagues at Fort Carson, and the flight operations team offered unwavering support. My supervisors ensured that my duties remained consistent, providing reassurance that my career would not be derailed by my family's actions. CW22 Jensen checked in regularly, offering words of encouragement, reminding me that my bravery extended far beyond the cockpit. Therapy became a cornerstone of my recovery. I enrolled in the military's victim advocacy program, participating in sessions that allowed me to unpack years of suppressed trauma. The counselor guided me through the feelings of betrayal, anger, and helplessness that had accumulated over decades. Each session peeled back layers of guilt and self-doubt, revealing the resilient core that had sustained me through training deployment and countless personal challenges. I learned techniques for grounding myself, for managing intrusive memories, and for cultivating a sense of safety within my own mind. I began journaling my experiences, a practice that helped me articulate the nuanced mix of emotions that surfaced daily. Writing became a form of reclamation, allowing me to assert ownership over my narrative. Living on base in temporary housing further reinforced my sense of security and autonomy. Removed from the immediate proximity of my family, I could breathe without anxiety, plan without fear, and sleep without dread. The walls of the apartment became a sanctuary, each object, each corner a reminder that this was my space, my life, and my rules. Slowly, I began to rebuild trust not in my family, but in myself and in the structures that had protected me. I took time to re-engage with my military responsibilities with renewed focus. Flight schedules, mission briefings, and operational planning became not just duties, but anchors that reinforced my competence, my purpose, and my worth. I noticed subtle shifts in my daily life. Eating without anxiety, laughing without restraint, and even responding to small slights with calm composure were markers of progress. Each day, the weight of decades of trauma lifted incrementally, replaced with a sense of self-possession I had never fully known. I also began considering how my experience could help others. Through the military victim advocacy program, I volunteered to share my story anonymously, contributing to workshops aimed at educating personnel on recognizing abuse, supporting colleagues, and navigating reporting mechanisms. Knowing that my ordeal could serve as a cautionary tale and a source of empowerment for others gave my suffering a purpose beyond personal recovery. There were moments, however, when memories of the BBQ, the shove, and the laughter surfaced with startling clarity. In those moments, I used the grounding techniques learned in therapy, focusing on my current safety and the irrefutable support of my professional and medical community. The contrast between past vulnerability and present empowerment was stark and grounding. Over time, the physical reminders of the injury healed, but the psychological scars required ongoing attention. I learned to recognize triggers, manage anxiety, and assert boundaries firmly and without hesitation. The burn on my forearm, once a symbol of aggression and neglect, became a reminder of my resilience and the justice I had fought to attain. The sense of closure extended beyond personal healing. By testifying, cooperating with CID, and allowing the evidence to speak for itself, I had ensured that Brittany and Linda were held accountable. Their attempts at manipulation, intimidation, and coercion had been ineffective. For the first time, I experienced the profound satisfaction of truth prevailing and of justice being enacted, even if imperfectly. Friends within the military community began to notice a change in me. I held myself differently, spoke with greater confidence, and approached challenges with renewed clarity. Colleagues expressed admiration not just for my professional acumen, but for the courage it took to confront long-standing family abuse publicly and through formal channels. I also noticed a shift in how I perceived family and relationships more broadly. The experience had taught me that protection, accountability, and genuine care are essential, and that toxic dynamics should never be tolerated for the sake of appearances. While the court had addressed the immediate perpetrators, I understood that my boundaries and vigilance would need to be maintained indefinitely. Through this aftermath, I realized that silence had been my oppressor, and breaking it had been my liberation. The combination of legal resolution, therapeutic support, professional affirmation, and personal boundaries created a foundation for a life that was no longer dictated by fear or manipulation. In the quiet evenings on base, I reflected on the journey from the BBQ incident to the courtroom, the burn pattern that had revealed the truth, and the CID investigation that had validated my experience. Each step, though painful, had led to empowerment and autonomy. I knew that the scars, both physical and emotional, were part of my story, but they no longer defined me. Instead, they underscored my resilience, my dedication to truth, and my capacity to reclaim agency over my life. In those moments of reflection, I felt gratitude for the support I had received, for the mechanisms that protected me, and for the inner strength I had cultivated over years of military service. I had transformed pain into purpose, trauma into testimony, and fear into determination. Moving forward, I resolved to continue living authentically, advocating for others, and maintaining the clear boundaries that ensured my safety and dignity. The silence that had once oppressed me was replaced with a steady, unwavering voice. A voice that could speak truth, assert rights, and navigate the complexities of a life that intertwined military duty with personal recovery. Each day in base housing, each therapy session, and each flight operation became a reaffirmation of my autonomy, a testament to the power of courage and a symbol of a life reclaimed from decades of neglect, manipulation, and abuse. March 2025 arrived with a sense of renewal that I had not felt in decades. The bitter months of confrontation, investigation, and recovery had culminated not only in justice, but also in an unexpected affirmation of my professional life. I received the official notice that I had been promoted to the position of Flight Operations Liaison at Fort Carson. It was a role that required meticulous coordination between flight crews, maintenance teams, and command personnel. More than the prestige or the pay increase, it symbolized recognition of my capabilities, judgment, and the resilience I had demonstrated throughout my military career. CW2 Jensen, who had been a constant source of encouragement throughout my ordeal, came by my office the morning the orders came through. His expression, a mixture of pride and relief, said more than words ever could. "You finally stood for yourself, Captain," he said. The tone carried weight, an acknowledgement of the personal battle I had fought separate from my military duties, yet inseparable from who I was as an officer and as a woman navigating the expectations of both my family and my profession. The words resonated deeply. For years, I had measured my worth through accomplishments in the cockpit and adherence to military discipline, all while silently enduring a toxic home life that attempted to undermine every ounce of self-confidence I possessed. To have my fortitude recognized in this new capacity was validation that I could both succeed professionally and defend myself personally. The promotion came with new responsibilities that demanded attention to detail, rapid decision-making, and the ability to manage complex interpersonal dynamics among personnel. These tasks mirrored, in a professional context, the strategies I had been forced to deploy to navigate my family's deceit and manipulation. The connection between personal resilience and professional competence became strikingly clear. The day I reported for my first briefing as Flight Operations Liaison, I walked through the halls of Fort Carson with a measured confidence. Colleagues who had supported me during my recovery acknowledged the change in demeanor. There was no overt announcement of my promotion beyond the official channels, but those who knew understood the significance. The role required me to interface with various departments, coordinate flight schedules, and ensure operational readiness for all aviation missions. I approached these duties with the same meticulous attention to detail I had cultivated through years of military training, now bolstered by a renewed sense of self-assurance and authority. The adjustment to the new role was accompanied by moments of reflection. Each time I reviewed flight manifests, coordinated missions, or provided guidance to subordinate officers, I reminded myself of the journey that had brought me here. The burn pattern on my arm, the courtroom testimony, the CID investigation, all these experiences had reshaped my perception of strength, accountability, and courage. I found myself mentoring junior officers, especially women navigating the challenges of military life while contending with external pressures and family dynamics. I shared lessons on resilience, asserting boundaries, and seeking support when confronted with adversity. The mentorship became both an outlet for empathy and a way to transform my personal hardships into guidance that could empower others. CW2 Jensen and I often debriefed after high-stakes operations or administrative challenges, reflecting on what worked, what needed improvement, and how to support the teams effectively. These sessions reinforced not only operational efficiency, but also trust and camaraderie. His acknowledgement that I had finally stood up for myself went beyond personal validation. It represented the bridging of my personal triumphs with professional recognition. Beyond the immediate tasks of my role, I began to consider long-term goals. I wanted to ensure that my experiences, both the trauma and the recovery, could inform policy improvements within the aviation unit and the broader command structure. I advocated for enhanced awareness programs on domestic abuse and support resources for military personnel facing family-related challenges. The promotion had not just elevated my position, it amplified my ability to effect positive change. Each morning as I donned my uniform and prepared for flight operations briefings, I felt a quiet strength that was self-sustaining. Unlike the clamor of recognition or the fleeting validation of superficial accomplishments, this sense of empowerment was internal, steady, and impervious to external judgment. It was the sound of resilience, a quiet affirmation of self-worth that did not require applause, only acknowledgement of truth. My interactions with Brittany and Linda had ceased entirely. Their absence in my life no longer carried fear, but rather a sense of liberated focus. I could invest energy into mission planning, team development, and operational excellence without the distraction of manipulative familial pressures. The contrast between my current stability and the chaotic past was striking. Each day in my new role was an exercise in both professional diligence and personal affirmation. By stepping fully into the responsibilities of Flight Operations Liaison 1 asserted not only my capability as an officer, but also my agency as an individual who refused to be defined by others' cruelty. The military community continued to recognize my contributions, and I found renewed respect, not merely for surviving adversity, but for translating that experience into leadership and mentorship. This phase of life also allowed for reflection on the psychological aspects of recovery. I practiced mindfulness before briefings, ensuring that past trauma did not influence decision-making or interactions. The discipline of military life combined with structured therapeutic techniques provided a foundation for sustained emotional stability. I noticed a profound shift in self-perception, where once I measured value by compliance and avoidance of conflict, I now understood the significance of self-advocacy, assertiveness, and accountability. My promotion was both a reward and a challenge to carry authority with integrity, to lead with empathy, and to remain vigilant in maintaining personal boundaries. The culmination of this journey from the traumatic events at the BBQ to the courtroom validation and now professional elevation symbolized the integration of personal resilience with vocational excellence. Each success in the Flight Operations Liaison role reaffirmed my capacity to navigate complex systems, advocate effectively, and maintain a sense of self that could withstand adversity. Even as the demands of the position intensified, the confidence I had cultivated through confronting and overcoming familial abuse allowed me to operate with clarity and calm. The quiet strength that permeated each action, whether reviewing flight schedules, advising junior officers, or contributing to operational strategy, represented the distilled essence of all I had endured and overcome. By the end of March, my life had transitioned into a new chapter. The professional recognition validated my skill, the personal boundaries safeguarded my well-being, and the advocacy work allowed me to transform personal trauma into constructive influence. Standing in the operations office, looking over flight manifests and mission reports, I felt a profound sense of agency. The chaos and humiliation of the past had not only been survived, but converted into a foundation for authority, empathy, and sustained professional achievement. I had discovered that true strength often manifests quietly in consistency, integrity, and the unwavering commitment to both self and mission. The journey had been arduous, fraught with fear, uncertainty, and confrontation, yet each step had reinforced a central truth. Resilience is cultivated through action, accountability, and the courage to claim ownership of one's life. As Flight Operations Liaison, I now embodied that truth daily, proving that standing for oneself, even amidst profound adversity, could lead to transformative growth, recognition, and enduring respect. Each challenge faced, each decision executed, and each boundary maintained echoed the lessons learned through trauma healing and justice. The quiet confidence I now carried was the sound of strength, unassuming but unbreakable, a signal to all that I had reclaimed control over my life, my career, and my destiny. 1 year after the courtroom verdict and the promotion, I found myself in a place I had once believed unreachable, a space of calm clarity and genuine peace. March 2026 marked 12 months since I had stood in El Paso County Court facing Brittany and Linda, and asserting my right to truth, dignity, and safety. The weight of those events had lingered, but with each passing day, it dissipated, replaced by a resolve to transform my experience into a force for good. I joined the military's support program for survivors of domestic abuse, particularly those who were spouses or family members connected to active duty personnel. My intent was not only to give back, but also to reclaim my story, fully transforming pain into empowerment. The first session I attended felt surreal. A circle of veterans, spouses, and support staff gathered around a modest conference room at Fort Carson. I could sense the tension in the air, the unspoken histories of hurt and survival that everyone carried. When the facilitator invited participants to share their experiences, I hesitated. I had relived my trauma countless times in private during therapy and in discussions with CID, but speaking openly to a group of strangers in uniform, people who understood both the discipline of military life and the shadow of family abuse, was different. I began slowly recounting my journey from the fateful 4th of July BBQ, the shove the burn pattern, and the laughter that had once cut deeper than any physical pain. I described the ER's reaction, the CID investigation, the courtroom, and the consequences my stepsister and stepmother faced. My voice wavered initially, the memories heavy, but as I continued, I felt the weight lift slightly. The room was silent, attentive, absorbing every word without judgment, without interruption. Each nod, each glance of understanding fortified my sense that sharing my story could prevent others from suffering in silence. I realized in that moment that the fear I had carried for years, the fear of ridicule, dismissal, or retaliation, had shrunk to nothing in the presence of people who believed in accountability and courage. My story became more than an account of personal suffering. It became a guide, a warning, and a source of hope. After sharing, several participants approached me privately. A military spouse whose partner had been facing aggressive behavior from a family member thanked me for giving voice to what she had been enduring quietly. A young officer confided that he had been hesitant to report a similar incident for fear of being seen as weak. In their eyes, I saw reflection, validation, and the ripple effect of resilience. I also recognized that my own healing had been facilitated by the structured support and validation I had received from military authorities, therapists, and advocates. I encouraged the group to take advantage of counseling, legal assistance, and the advocacy programs available to military personnel and their families. By situating personal trauma within the framework of institutional support, I aimed to empower others to act decisively and protectively rather than remain passive. Over the months, I began mentoring new participants individually. I helped them navigate the complex dynamics of family interference, abuse, and manipulation, while balancing the unique demands of military service. I guided them in understanding their rights, reporting procedures, and the importance of self-care. It was profoundly healing to transform my history of suppression and endurance into actionable guidance for others. In parallel, I noted a profound internal shift. Hearing my name or the names of Linda and Brittany no longer elicited panic, anger, or avoidance. The mere mention of their presence in my past no longer dominated my thoughts or dictated my behavior. I could acknowledge the past without reliving it, accept the injustice without allowing it to consume me, and hold accountability without fostering ongoing resentment. This freedom, emotional and mental, was the truest measure of my recovery. One afternoon, while facilitating a workshop on assertive communication, I reflected on the trajectory of my life over the past year. The fiery humiliation of the BBQ, the invasive investigations, the courtroom exposure, and the personal advocacy had all led to a life that was ironically quieter yet more powerful. I was no longer reacting to the whims and manipulations of others. I was acting in alignment with my principles, military discipline, and personal ethics. My promotion as Flight Operations Liaison had provided stability, respect, and a tangible expression of professional recognition, but this newfound inner peace was the most significant achievement. I no longer needed external validation to define my worth. The experiences that once seemed like insurmountable obstacles had in retrospect been a crucible that forged resilience, clarity, and self-respect. As part of the program, I recorded a session recounting my journey from victimization to advocacy. The recording would be used to educate, inspire, and empower other service members, creating a legacy of awareness that extended beyond individual stories. This act of sharing was both cathartic and strategic. It allowed me to cement my personal narrative, ensuring that the lessons learned from pain were preserved and transmitted effectively. Beyond the structured program, I took deliberate steps to cultivate life outside the shadows of my family. I spent more time with colleagues who respected boundaries, engaged in recreational aviation activities, and reconnected with friends who had been supportive during my recovery. The presence of authentic, reliable relationships became essential in reinforcing the personal boundaries I had established. One particular morning, I walked through Fort Carson's grounds, the crisp Colorado air carrying the scent of pine and summer blooms. The tranquility of the environment contrasted sharply with the chaos of the past. I reflected on how far I had come, from a young officer silenced by fear and family dynamics to a woman who could command a room, mentor peers, advocate for victims, and navigate complex military operations without hesitation. The emotional journey had been arduous, but the clarity and confidence I now carried were unequivocal. As I concluded my reflections that day, I recognized that peace was not a destination, but an ongoing practice, a commitment to self-respect, accountability, and constructive action. I no longer felt compelled to monitor every word or anticipate the reactions of those who had once harmed me. I could move forward unshackled from the past, guided by the principles of truth, justice, and resilience. In moments of quiet contemplation, I realized that the fire of my past, though painful, had forged a durable inner strength. The burn pattern, the courtroom, and the public exposure had all contributed to a profound understanding. Real power is measured not in retaliation, but in the capacity to maintain integrity, assert boundaries, and foster positive influence. 1 year later, I could finally say that peace had settled after the fire. I was no longer haunted, no longer anxious, and no longer constrained by fear of family retaliation. My story had transformed from a private struggle into a public testament of courage, advocacy, and enduring strength. I had reclaimed my voice, my authority, and my life. I could speak the names of Linda and Brittany without flinching. I could share my story with confidence and empathy. And most importantly, I could serve as living proof that even after profound betrayal and humiliation, resilience, justice, and peace were achievable. Through deliberate action support programs, personal reflection, and professional excellence, I had stepped fully into a life that honored both my past and my potential, embodying the quiet yet formidable power that comes from surviving, standing firm, and turning trauma into a legacy of empowerment for others. If someone had told me a year ago that I would be standing here today reflecting on a journey that began with pain, humiliation, and betrayal, I would have laughed bitterly at the thought. Yet, here I am, a year removed from that fateful 4th of July BBQ, a year after the burn pattern revealed the truth in the ER, a year since CID investigated the courtroom, held its hearings, and the consequences were delivered. My life, once clouded by fear, family manipulation, and self-doubt, has transformed into a testament of resilience, courage, and the power of speaking truth even when everyone else doubts you. The memory of that day, the push, the pain, the laughter of Brittany and Linda, and the shocking indifference of my father still flares in my mind at unexpected moments. But instead of triggering panic, it now fuels resolve. I remember standing in the Evans Army Community Hospital, the linear burn pattern revealed to medical staff who could immediately tell something was intentional. The cold, sterile environment of the ER, the sharp lighting reflecting off metal surfaces, and Dr. Meek's piercing questions are etched in my memory. The moment CID entered the narrative, their calculated inquiries, the way Special Agent Hale examined the pattern, how they scrutinized my forearm and elbow, it all reinforced that the truth could not be hidden indefinitely. I recall for the first time breaking down in front of someone other than myself, realizing the magnitude of betrayal I had endured from my family. That experience shattered decades of silence and self-protection. And yet it also created a pathway toward empowerment. Flashbacks to my childhood reminded me how this pattern of dismissal and mockery had been ingrained. 8-year-old Mara being ridiculed by my stepmother for a scraped knee. 12-year-old Mara forced to stand outside in punishment. 18-year-old Mara receiving minimal support when pursuing the ROTC scholarship, and the countless moments of isolation during O-suit training all set the stage for a lifetime of suppressed emotions and endured humiliation. Recognizing this chain was painful, but it was essential. It highlighted that resilience does not mean enduring alone, but knowing when to seek support and when to assert boundaries. The investigation deepened the narrative. Photographs, video footage, and eyewitness accounts revealed the stark reality. Brittany's shove was intentional. Linda's laughter was malicious, and my father's silence was complicit. These were not accidents or miscommunications, they were deliberate attempts to undermine me. CID's meticulous documentation and collection of evidence validated the trauma I had long internalized, showing me that institutional support could intersect with personal courage to ensure accountability. When Linda reached out pleading for mercy and claiming family bonds should protect Brittany from consequences, I faced a crucial moral and emotional crossroads. Brittany's messages attempted to manipulate my sense of duty, her words coated in guilt and expectation, suggesting that silence or compliance was owed to them because we were family. Yet I had learned that family loyalty does not extend to condoning abuse or ignoring injustice. My refusal to yield marked a turning point in reclaiming authority over my own life. Public exposure was a pivotal moment. Seeing the BBQ video replayed in Falcon HOA Community Hall in front of neighbors and community members was both terrifying and liberating. For the first time, the narrative I had carried in secret became visible to others, and the perpetrators of harm were confronted with their actions in a social space they could not control. The reactions. Linda's pallor, Brittany's forced tears, and the community's audible shock demonstrated that truth once revealed could not be denied. Witnessing that humiliation in reverse, I experienced a sense of justice beyond legal judgment. Social accountability. The court proceedings further cemented the consequences. January 2025 in El Paso County Court presented an arena where evidence, truth, and professional evaluation intersected. The burn pattern photos coupled with video documentation made any attempt to deflect responsibility impossible. Brittany faced community service anger management and restitution obligations, while Linda received fines and mandatory counseling. My father remained a silent figure absent from accountability, but I recognized that my own validation did not require his acknowledgement. After the legal conclusion, I began reconstructing my life. I cut all contact with my toxic family members, securing my emotional and physical space. Military colleagues, advocates, and my chain of command offered support, affirming my role, my professional reputation, and my worth. Therapy enabled me to unpack decades of compounded trauma, equipping me with tools to navigate future challenges with confidence. My promotion to Flight Operations Liaison in March 2025 symbolized professional growth and personal recognition. CD2, Jensen's words, "You finally stood for yourself." Captain resonated not only with pride, but with the affirmation that my actions, advocacy, and courage had tangible impact. Beyond professional milestones, the most profound change was internal. I no longer feared the mention of my family members' names. I could recount experiences without flinching, without reliving the shame, without allowing their manipulation to infiltrate my thoughts. Peace, once unimaginable, had become a daily reality. 1 year after the verdict and the promotion, I engaged actively in military programs supporting survivors of domestic abuse and family manipulation. Sharing my story in workshops, mentoring fellow service members, and advocating for victims who had endured silent suffering became my mission. By converting my trauma into actionable guidance and empathetic mentorship, I created a legacy that could prevent others from facing similar isolation and fear. Reflection revealed the enduring lesson true. Empowerment arises not from retaliation, but from integrity, courage, and advocacy. The burn pattern, the videos, the courtroom, and the public exposure had served as instruments to illuminate truth. Yet the ultimate measure of victory lay in my ability to maintain dignity, assert boundaries, and foster positive influence while reclaiming my narrative. Now I can look back on the entirety of this experience without bitterness. The fire of betrayal and humiliation forged resilience, clarity, and authority. I can speak openly about the events, advise others, and continue to excel in my military career without hesitation or compromise. The lessons extend beyond personal triumph. They serve as guidance for anyone who has endured laughter at their pain, manipulation, or abuse. To my audience, especially those watching from the United States and perhaps familiar with similar family dynamics, I offer this message. If someone laughs at your suffering, if those you trusted dismiss your pain, if fear has silenced you for years, speak the truth. Seek institutional support. Document evidence and never allow manipulation to define your narrative. Courage is not absence of fear, but action despite it. Justice is not only a legal construct, but also an ethical and personal reclaiming of power. As I conclude, I ask you to reflect. Have you ever been laughed at while hurt? Have you endured a family member's cruelty and silence? Sharing your experience, even in small ways, can be transformative. Tell me where you are watching from, what your story is, and how you have stood up to adversity. By engaging, commenting, and connecting, you join a community of resilience, accountability, and justice. My story is one chapter among many, but each voice adds strength to the collective narrative. If someone laughs at your pain, speak your truth. If someone underestimates your courage, act anyway. If someone tries to erase your dignity, reclaim it. And if you ever find yourself in the quiet after the fire, recognize that you are stronger than the trauma, wiser than the manipulation, and capable of transforming adversity into empowerment. My name is Captain Mara Ellington, and I have lived, endured, and acted. Now it is your turn to acknowledge the truth. Protect your voice, and ensure that injustice never silences you again. The path is not easy. The memories are not fleeting, but the courage once embraced echoes far beyond the individual, inspiring others to confront, survive, and thrive. So tell me where you are watching from, and if you've ever had family laugh at your pain. Your stories matter. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. And above all, you are not alone. Tell me where you're watching from, and if you've ever had family laugh at your pain.